Hello and welcome to Web Components for Java Developer. My name is Sven and I will explain you in this video how to connect from the server side from core and pure Java to Web Components on the client side. If you're interested in this, stay tuned. Web Components for Java Developer. We want to see how to connect with core Java to this Web Components. Web Components are used for web apps or later for progressive web apps. But first of all, we want to see what Web Components are. Web Components are a standard to define bricks for web apps. Means that over the history we saw so many technologies are coming and going and so many different standards, but in the end every vendor agreed more or less that we need a global standard that fits to all browsers, and it's called Web Components. Web Components are based on traditional web technologies like HTML5, JavaScript and CSS. With this one you have just a component that you can create your own tags. For example, you have a button, you have a grid, you have a whatever, and you can combine this web component because they are isolated by themselves. The next thing is that this web components now available on central repositories in the internet. A good place to start searching for this one is, for example, webcomponent.org. And it's mostly managed by npm. The next thing is, if you're coming as a core Java developer from the server side, then you know technologies like Swing. Like if you want to have a new button, you just say new button. But how can we combine both sides so that it fits and the feeling is like a core Java button, for example? What do we need? If we have this web component in the beginning on the client side, we need to manage the communication between the client and the server side. This is a communication layer, and after this we have a corresponding Java component that is communicating over this communication layer up to the web component. This would be an ideal world. I will show you how you can do this with existing open source toolings. And if you're a Java developer, mostly you want to write something like a JUnit test to test your application. And even this is possible. So what we need is, we need the web component itself, we need a communication layer, we need the Java representation of this one, and corresponding to this one, we need a test environment or a test component for this one. How to test, how to connect to this testing environment, how to ramp up a full stack test, I will explain in a little bit later. Now we want to focus on the mapping from Java over communication to the web app itself. As an example, I search for some web components, industrial standards that may be interesting for different projects, and I found the web components called SAP UI5. Sometimes you have a customer, they have this SAP look and feel already, and they want to have this one in the component you're writing, or for the web app you're writing, or you have to integrate or whatever. So I want to show how to connect with Java to this SAP UI5 web components. This SAP components are available under sap.github.io, and you will see that they have this UI5 web component. There's a website you can navigate through, you can select different ones, you have documentation about it, but they are all web components, pure client-side web components. Normally, if you want to use this web component, what you have to do, first of all, you have to deal with npm. npm is a package manager that is used for this technology, or for this web components here in this place. There are some others, but they are using npm. Then what you need is you have to install this web component locally on your machine. It's more or less, if you're coming from the Java world, something like a .m2 folder where you have all the dependencies you grabbed once from Maven Central. So we are doing exactly the same. So npm install and then the address of the component. For example, here it's an add ui5/webcomponents. With this, all web components are loaded from the internet to your local npm caching folder, whatever is defined on your machine. And the next thing is you need something like, I want to use this dedicated web component, for example, a badge. Then you have to write somewhere in your application, in the UI part, import add ui5/webcomponents/disk/badge. The last one after import is something that depends on the framework itself. So it's different. It's not a naming schema that's always the same. But here for this badge, you should have this import statement inside your web application to have access to this tag. And then you have an additional tag that you can use in HTML5, and it's called ui5-badge. That's it. So this is what you should have to do if you are running completely on a client side and you're composing on a client side. But we want to have it now in Java. I want to get rid of this npm install. I want to get rid of this import statement, and I don't want to create this tag somewhere and playing around with CSS. So how this could look like. If you're checking the documentation, you will see that this basic badge I'm showing here in my slides is an easy component. It's just a place where some text is in. You can choose different colors, and you see an example here how it's used on the client side. You will see there's this tag ui-5 badge, and then you have this attribute color-schema, and then you can just add some text as a client element here. So what to do to get it now? What we can do is we can use some open source tool that are available, and one tool that I'm using, or one framework that I'm using, is the Vardin Flow framework. If you're looking at Vardin homepage, you will see that they have some pure client-side components, web components, but they have a mapping for the Java world already. If you're checking the documentation, you will see they have new button, new grid, new toolbar, whatever. And then you have this look and feel from Vardin. But we want to use now the web components from SAP. What you can do here is that you are just looking inside this API, and they have this very generic layer. And if you're looking at this generic layer that is part of the free open source packages from Vardin, you will see that you have this layer that is generic and is just handling the communication itself. What you need is this flow server import statements to have this stuff available by Maven. I have a demo repository or a demo application on GitHub. I will give you the link here. But what you have here, if you're looking at the documentation, that you have some corresponding tags already. So instead of npm install ui5 web components, what you can do on your Java class is you can write an annotation npm package, and then the value would be ui5 web components and a version. And with this, you're addressing exactly what you are defining normally with npm install web components. The next thing is I want to have an import statement or a corresponding thing to my import statement on my web page. So here in Vardin you have this annotation JS module, and then you are giving exactly the coordinates to this badge. For example, ui5 web components this badge.js. That's it. So then you have a corresponding one to import ui5, and if you want to use this one, so this tag, or to define this tag, you can create a tag called add tag and then the name ui5-badge. So this is more or less what we have on the Java world if you are looking at this Vardin framework. And if you want to map now your own components, I want to show how to do this in the Java world. So first of all, you have to create a class, a regular class, and you're extending from component from the Java package, Java flow. And with component, you have a generic component, a generic element, a generic HTML5 web component. This is a representing element. So we're saying UI5 badge is our class. So public class UI5 badge extends component. To connect now to this npm stuff, we add this annotations npm package with a value of UI5 web components. We are redirecting to a dedicated web component with JS module and then exactly the JavaScript file via addressing. And we are defining the tag, and this one is exactly the tag that is used on the client side with add tag UI5-badge. That's it. So with this, and with a layer of Vardin Flow that's open source, you have now the possibility to address exactly on the Java side this web component, and the communication is done by the framework. So for example, if you're deactivating the button, then the communication framework and the server-side state will make sure that if there's a request coming from a compromised client with click a button, the framework will just say, it's not active, I'm not activating the action listener. Okay, so what we're doing now, we want to check how to set components or properties. So what you are creating is just a setter, that a regular setter on the Java side. And to have access to this component on the client side, the first thing from the component, you have this method called getElement. GetElement gives you the generic representing component, and then you have a method like setAttribute and setProperty. Here I'm explicit using getElement.setProperty. Then I'm one argument is the name of the property that is used on the client side, and the second one is just the value you are adding. That's it. So now we have a plain setter with a string in, and this is just setting the property on the client side. If you want to get this back, so you want to get this state, what you're writing is a getter, a plain getter. So a method public string get color scheme, for example, and inside again you say get element, you have the generic one, dot get property. Then you have the property with the name that you are giving in the argument of the method, for example color scheme, and then you have the value of this property. So this is very, very convenient because it's easy to map. If we are doing this one, we will see that the badge, for example, will not only have tags or color, it will have, for example, complex attributes itself. Here, what we have is, for example, an UI5 icon that could be set as a child element. So, first of all, you would immediately create this UI5 component in the same way if you have done it with a UI5 badge. If you have done this one, how to connect it? The connection is here done again with a setter. So you want to set an UI5 icon or some other web component. You're creating a setter, public void set UI5 icon, it's the name here, and then you're setting this Java representative instance. Inside the method, what you're doing is get element, you have the generic one, and then append child. That's it. And from this component you want to set, you're just saying component.getElement, the generic one again. So now you can connect in a generic way components so that you have a hierarchy from parent to child, and in the same way you can remove it. So what we have reached so far, we reached so far the possibility that we can map web components to the Java side so that we have them in Java classes. We know how to connect and address this web component, and then with getters and setters we are just adding and setting, we are adding childs, and we are setting properties or attributes, or getting attributes and properties and childs. So this is quite nice. In this slide I show you how it looks like for a Java developer now. So if you have a colleague that don't want to do this mapping just using this core Java file, then he has something like new UI5 badge, set text, set color scheme, set UI5 icon, and that's it. adding to the main of the application. So with this one, you have the freedom now to connect to all web components that are fulfilling this web standard. And the good thing is you can now add, for example, action listeners, click listeners, and all this stuff. There is some advice how to do it, because we are dealing with a bunch of strings. So what I really would recommend is that the name of the property and the name of the attribute and all this stuff, makes them as a constant inside your class, so that you're just dealing with this constant instead with the string itself, just to make it refactoring safe. This is quite easy. I showed here an example in the slides. So but this depends on your needs and what rules and policies you have for your Java code inside your application. There's one thing that is already mapping Vaadin Flow components, and with this the generic web components, to Kotlin already, and it's called Caribou DSL. It's maintained by one employee from Vaadin, and it's more or less using the Kotlin type-safe builders to give you a DSL that is more like showing you the structure of the page itself. I have here just a tiny example. So a button, then this brackets open, and then on left click on whatever stuff, and so on and so on. So if you like this builder style, or if you want to have a look at this Kotlin version, just go to vaadin.kotlin.eu and try it out. It's quite nice. This SAP Web Components, a bunch of them, they are already mapped and they are free available. So I have this GitHub repository. It's called vaadin-developer/SAP-UR5 for Flow. I will give you the link here. So if you want to try out this one, what I really recommend is that you are starting a free trial at JFROG platform, because then you can manage the NPM as well as the Maven repository there to aggregate all this stuff. And the good thing is that you have to think about what security issues you will get. So if you are dealing as a Java developer on core Java, you have to find out, for example, if you're dealing with serialization, if you have some weak libraries in your dependency tree. With this mapping now, you are adding a different kind of technology, and maybe you are not really aware of all these tiny fine-grained things. So it would be really a good advice to connect here, for example, over Artifactory with the X-Ray instance you are getting with the free tier, because then you can check for compliance, for security, for vulnerability issues. If you're a paid member, then compliance issues as well. But the free tier is giving you access to X-Ray, and X-Ray will give you the possibility to scan for known vulnerabilities. If you want to see how this is done inside your IDE, so that immediately if you're adding this dependency to your Maven dependency, for example, to your POM file, you can do it with a JFROG plugin. I haven't dedicated HOWTO about this. It's a JFROG HOWTO called IDE plugin for IntelliJ. We have it for Eclipse and some others. Then it will see immediately what X-Ray is giving you if you're adding your dependencies. And the good thing is it will check the web components as well, because it's aware of NPM. I have an example how to harden the Vaadin stack itself, because if you're using, or if you want to go this way, then you're using the Vaadin Flow dependencies, and this is a bigger framework, so it makes sense to have an eye on vulnerabilities as well. I have here a dedicated HOWTO about how to harden Vaadin itself, and it will show you how you can do it for your application as well. So it's called How to Harden Vaadin Flow. And yes, one thing is missing, and this would be another topic, is TDD for web components. And this is how to test now this web components, for example, with JUnit 5. Thank you very much for attending this here, and I would really appreciate if you give me a thumbs up or subscribe my channel. And the next part will be TDD for web components, and then I will show you how to write JUnit 5 tests against your self-mapped web components. So, see you later.